Sure, you need a cushion.
Yeah.
So I was really unwinding my memory disk. And yes, there were a few very complicated long distance, you know, caregiving that I got involved with. But we won't have tedious descriptions of a case, but you can just cull a little bit from real life, you know.
That is true. We are live, and a very good evening to all of you, those who have joined us and those who will probably be watching at whichever time of the day or evening. Welcome to the 38th webinar. I have to say there is a little joy that I get every time this counter goes up a little bit. It's a testimony to the persistence and the hard work of the Caregiver Saathi team that works in the background and makes sure that we design topics that are relevant to family caregivers, to our times, and that are conversations that we may not have had thus far. And with that, welcome to the 30th webinar on the Compassionate Caring series. Today, we will be talking about what can long distance caregivers do from far? As we were preparing for this series, we were debating whether or not we can call someone who is long distance a caregiver. And if you have a look at this picture, it reminded me of the early days when I was a young person working in another city, and my father, who had terminal illness, was with my mom and my grandmom in Gurgaon. And for a very, very long time, I confessed and I told everyone that my mother was the caregiver. She was the primary caregiver. It took me a long while to acknowledge and accept that even as someone who was staying far, I was a caregiver. The nuance being that I was merely a long distance caregiver, and the nature of care that I lent not just to my father, but perhaps to the primary caregiver as well, was slightly different. But I was a caregiver, all right. And with increasingly nuclear families and smaller families and distributed families, even nuclear families are distributed these days in 2 or 3 different cities. So it becomes pertinent, topical, and really relevant for us to have a conversation around what does it mean to be a long distance caregiver. And that said, with that as the background, I would like to talk about Caregiver Saathi, a brief introduction to all of you. Some of you may find this a repetition, and some of you maybe. So for the benefit of those who are new, Caregiver Saathi is an organization that aims to create an ecosystem of well-being and healing for the primary caregiver. Family members or family caregivers of those navigating terminal illness, chronic conditions, or any other life-limiting conditions have their unique challenges. And we support them through their caregiving journeys, and most importantly, sometimes beyond the caregiving journeys. What is our philosophy? We wish to create an environment of well-being such that the caregiver has choice and can feel empowered. We help the caregiver and the care receiver or the patient lead full lives. How do we do this? In today's world, we have been able to reach out to a large number of people through technology. but there is no way that care can be provided without human connection and human touch. Therefore, we have awareness programs that are both online and offline. We have a helpline. We conduct what are called healing circles or empathy circles, through which we connect with people who have been caregivers, who are caregivers, so that we can support, learn, and grow together. Social media has been the cornerstone of our communication and outreach. We would encourage you to join our handles on various media, whether it is Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, LinkedIn, and we are live right now on all these three. Join us so that you know the latest updates, as well as encourage people that you know to join so that they can get the regular updates. Providing access to relevant information in these times has become essential, because while there is the World Wide Web and while there is Google search, accessing the relevant information at the time that you need it for making the right decisions is a task by itself. And we aim to do that through our platform. We have an app and we have a website through which you can access information, relevant programs, and a community. What we have done so far is built a community, our app. We conduct learning programs, which are both online and offline. There is an app to aid family caregivers. We have a community through which we connect in various forums, this webinar being one. Caregiver Stories is our way of listening to the stories of people we refer to as gentle warriors very fondly. Listening to caregiver stories is important because, we need to shift the narrative around caregivers and caregiving. We have a fairly tough narrative around caregivers and caregiving, where there are really high gold standards. You cannot talk about the difficulty and challenges of caregiving. So we invite caregivers every week to tell us their stories. And telling your story can be healing for the storyteller, as much as inspiring for those of us who can listen to these stories and understand that we are not alone should we have to walk this path. We also allow for caregiver stories to be told anonymously, and that is through our podcast, which is called Caregiver Diaries. Should you want to tell your story, or should you know of a story that deserves to be told, reach out to us and we would love to host or tell the story via the podcast. This webinar is an example of compassionate caring. Compassionate caring is a series of webinars and learning programs where we invite experts to help us understand how modern day caregiving can be compassionate both to the patient as well as the caregiver. The caregiver does not have to be sacrificed at the altar of either the condition or caregiving as a long-term journey. Caregiver coaching is one-on-one interaction with family caregivers so that they can learn the skills, the emotional mastery that is required for long-term care, which can be quite a marathon in some cases. Family counseling is required because some long-term illnesses or some difficult illnesses impact the whole family. And of course, we have a respite care program where volunteers offer respite to family caregivers and the patients. There are many ways in which you can participate: by joining the healing circles or support groups, by telling your caregiving stories or encouraging caregivers to tell their stories, by joining us on social media, helping us spread the word, by volunteering. We have online and offline volunteers, so you could volunteer in any way, both your time as well as your skills, and we would be only richer by your contribution. We are a philanthropic and therefore donation-based organization, so you could raise funds for us or donate to us. We have an elaborate internship and fellowship program. Should you be a person who is a graduate and interested in an internship program, you could join for a 2 to 3 month internship. A fellowship program is a 15-month leadership development program that an experienced person could sign up for. We need all the support that we can get. So we have an ambassador program where individuals who believe in us and have the conviction in this concept help us make referrals to partners, hospitals, and organizations. There is a framework that we follow for well-being. We believe that at the very core of an individual is the physiological, psychological, and spiritual well-being. This, in terms of our interface with the world, has 3 other elements of well-being, which are social, financial, legal, and life and work purpose alignment. All of these elements of well-being are anchored or expressed in our existence through our creative expression. These 7 elements of well-being constitute our overall well-being, and stress is caused when there is an imbalance in our well-being. Unaddressed chronic stress leads to mental health issues. And building resilience, resilience is not just physical resilience, but physical, mental, emotional, and financial resilience needs to be done through practices of mind, body, and soul. And we have some programs through which we enable caregivers to build their resilience. Today's session, some admin announcements very quickly. There are 3 parts. We will have an interaction with our guest today, a question answer session, and feedback. We request you to participate in all, give your feedback so that we can design better programs. Keep your mics muted. If your camera is stable, keep it on, else please turn it off. We are recording this session. Some section of this discussion will be used for sharing later, and we will be live on the 3 platforms, Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn, and can be accessed for viewing later. Please feel free to share it in your networks and help us design better learning sessions. With that, it is my absolute delight to welcome Dr. Raj Kumar Mani. Dr. Raj Kumar Mani, who is an MDP FRCP London and US, is a well-known name in critical care, pulmonology, and sleep medicine. Until a little while ago, I didn't even know that there was a concept like sleep medicine. He is currently Director, Clinical Services, Pulmonology and Critical Care at Yashoda Super Specialty Hospital in Ghaziabad, UP. His career of almost 40 years. In his career, he has made a mark in his role as a pioneer clinician, academician, researcher, teacher, campaigner for humanizing medicine, and medical administrator. I have to put in a word over here that he has been a big support and has encouraged Caregiver Saathi for our initiative as well. He's been instrumental in setting up and leading cutting-edge pulmonary and critical care departments in various frontline hospitals across Delhi NCR. It is my absolute delight to welcome Dr. Raj, who has many other sides to him which are not in the bio, like he is a lovely poet and has a fantastic cheeky sense of humor. Welcome, Dr. Raj.
Good afternoon, Bhavana, and I look forward to this hopefully very interactive session.
So thank you for taking the time and our conversation. Let's start with your views around the topic. Long distance caregiving. What would you like to kick off this evening with?
See, long distance caregiving is a reality which wasn't focused on for a long time. Even before the COVID times, invariably, as you said, even nuclear families are distributed now, scattered all over the world. You would have some elderly person or somebody disabled with you, and you would have calls from afar, inquiring anxiously and wanting to be a part of the caregiving. But this didn't receive the focus or discussion for a long time, to just accept it and we carried on. But come COVID, this came into huge explosive highlight, in the sense that you had distance caregiving giving even within the country. But then we had several layers of distance caregiving within the country, outside the state, or even outside the country. Across continents, there have been instances where we had to sort of create a platform, and that got enabled with technology, of course. And then it threw up a very interesting, unknown ways of caregiving. And we discovered that it's all possible. Where there is a will, there is a way. Where there's a heart, it finds its way.
Dr. Mani, help us understand what are what in your experience are the big challenges of long distance caregiving?
You see, the long distance caregiving, if you talk about the family caregivers, which let's call it family caregivers, and then there are the professional caregivers who are out here. Now, both have their challenges. Family caregiving, of course, it's a story of anguish and desperation very often, because even doctors' family, doctors settled abroad, had their family members affected in the recent COVID or even before, and they were totally feeling helpless, left feeling helpless as to how to proceed, how to care for their loved one. And that did manifest in extreme degree of stress. Anguish and stress is a problem. Secondly, the questioning and the doubts they raise, they have reservations on the local professional caregivers. So local professional caregiving also came under extreme stress. There was stress of course, to look after a patient, and then there was stress of answering queries. And sometimes there's a big disconnect between what's happening on the ground and then what people are imagining way out, and then this kind of bridging of ideas, bridging of understanding was a challenge.
So while these are the challenges, in your experience, would you like to tell us about how you believe that if I am someone who's a family member, I stay in a different city, my aged parents are in another city, I might be in a time zone difference. What are some of the things that I have to skill myself in?
Firstly, to tell yourself it's possible to care. It's not always necessary, or to the extent necessary that we must have a physical presence. It's quite good, because I have discovered that people are able to care very well from a distance, provided they participate in understanding the problem, and then together with the local caregivers, they are able to devise strategies and then do something actionable, right? Rather than just fret and worry. Firstly, they have to tell themselves this is possible. So you look at a problem, not as a problem, but as an opportunity to find solutions and to make it easier for your loved one. Number two, you see, frequent communication on this technology-enabled platforms, that has made a lot of difference. We didn't know about Zoom meetings and this and that before COVID. No, they were available before, but we didn't have access to these technology because of lack of awareness. So becoming familiar with technology-enabled platforms is another one. And then, of course, locally, what help is available. See, now a lot of new ways of administering care or care delivery has evolved. Home care, for example. Home care in big metropolises have evolved in a big way. And they have to be accessed. All right. And they have to be integrated. And thirdly, you can sort of also improve the availability of resources to your patient, your loved one. Again, through technology. Using technology, you can provide oxygen, for instance. Right? You can provide not only home health, but some amenities. So I think that's the way to go. And we must use all the principles that are useful in direct face-to-face communication, through long distance virtual communication. We can integrate those principles as far as possible. It's
Right.
possible.
So tell us the principles of communication, because while one hears that so often, that communication is key, communication is the ultimate. Perhaps we need to revisit.
I agree
What
with
are
you
the
because
principles?
communication is not discussed enough, and we are still learning. Well, we have had to learn a lot because we assume that we are all naturally good communicators. Particularly this happens with professional caregivers. Doctors and nurses believe they are good communicators, but that means they haven't really taken a good hard look at what communication is and how effective they are. First thing about communication is that the big gap between two people. Okay, the doctor-patient relationship is very uneven. Okay, one holds oneself above the other. Okay, which is not good enough for a communication. We have to be on level ground. Then there is a gap which reduced. The first thing we have to remind ourselves, as some professionals who have specialized knowledge, but specialized knowledge is a means by which you inform people. It's not a means by which you put yourself above the other.
Mm.
So communication is to firstly get to level ground, and then have an intrinsic sort of worth accorded to every individual. So respect is very important.
But Dr. Mani, I'm going to say this. So for example, what you're saying is actually a lesson for perhaps doctors, because doctors are the experts. What can a family caregiver do?
For
in
family
this case?
caregivers, yeah, I'm coming to that. So family caregivers have to, of course, communicate well with the professional caregivers so that they get empowered, they get
Right.
information.
Mm.
As far as family caregivers are concerned, what is the barrier? The barrier is anxiety. Barrier is projection, right? They project their fears, and then that gets superimposed on realities, and they're not able to grasp the actual facts of the case. So, firstly, come to communication table with a little open mind in order to grasp real facts, and then also feel free to express their own reservations. All right, this freedom of speech. That's why I said firstly the bridging is to be done on level ground. What I have, my problem is that while doctors hold themselves above, the family caregivers, they uh, are hampered by certain reservations, and they are handicapped by certain preconceived notions. Okay.
May by the same vein, I think while the doctors hold themselves at a level higher, maybe family caregivers also say, "आप हमारे माँ बाप हैं, आप जो कहेंगे." You are the final expert and you are God. And family caregivers do not give themselves a sense of agency.
Yes, that's what I mean. Absolutely. So both sides, there's a problem. And if we can cut that off, all right, these are hampering. They are not coming. They are coming in the way. You neither need to project the doctor as somebody, very superior, nor should the doctor, think he has privy to very special knowledge. No, most people with the similar experience and training would have similar knowledge. So we have a role to play in sharing that knowledge. So in a spirit of sharing, and the knowledge about the patient is much more with the family caregivers, isn't it? So while we have knowledge of medicine, they have knowledge about the patient.
Great point.
What the patient's condition is, what is the background, what is the story, what is the context, and what is the personality of the patient. Now, this is what we have to glean from the family caregivers. Right. Then we can come together. And we don't have the knowledge of what the family is going through. Actually, our mission, what is the mission of a caregiver? professional caregiver, for instance, mission is to reduce suffering, at least mitigate the burden of suffering.
Right.
That's what it is. So science and everything is a tool. It's not an end in itself. Basically, you want an improved quality of human experience. So for that, I will be more competent to do if I can understand the family, what it's going through. I can understand the patient as a human being. So I would say on both sides, we do not have to have preconceived notions. We should come to the table with open-mindedness, feel free to express ourselves, and have a good, even exchange. First up. The second point I'll come to once you've given your feedback on this point.
No, I think I was just wondering whether a tip that one could give someone who is long distance is to prepare for the conversation. So if you're going to have a call with the doctor, maybe sitting down and writing your set of questions is a good idea before you get into the conversation, because you may forget or the conversation may go elsewhere.
Absolutely. So, that's a very, very important point. So preparing for the conversation,
right?
That is, you note down your reservations, note down the points you want to express. What we have learned in the last few minutes is when we open ourselves up, that is the bridge to a relationship, and that is the sort of relationship. There is no family caregiver can function effectively without the help from the professional caregiver, and vice versa.
Right.
So that is the first step. We must first create a rapport and an understanding, and that we can build a great deal on that.
Right. And if you mentioned that one of the biggest hurdles is anxiety, then a good way to handle anxiety is to prepare and is to probably make some notes when you are, slightly not in the throes of emotion. And that's a good way to kind of stay the course of the conversation.
Very well said, actually. Now, on the same point of anxiety and depression and anguish, many people feel lost totally. Okay, they lose, so-called depersonalization is experienced. Now, being aware of this, a professional caregiver uses communication as a tool to address this and alleviate this psychological burden. Now we have learned a lot in the professional circles. We have learned a lot about the family experience, through questionnaires and studies and researches. A lot of it has been done in France, and we learn that about half the families undergo these experiences that I've mentioned: anxiety, depression, depersonalization. And now with the distance and all that, perhaps this proportion will be much more. So if we first part of the conversation was factual information, and second part of the conversation is receiving information from the family and also detecting the cues of anxiety, depression, and other emotions. So you turn into a good listener after that. You listen actively means you don't just listen to just facts. You listen to the emotion that is being conveyed in there. When we recognize an emotion, for example, you recognize and you acknowledge anxiety, you recognize and acknowledge depression, that itself reduces the burden. Because once you feel not alone, all this is works around loneliness. And once loneliness is taken away, there is somebody who is reaching out to you. They don't have such an overwhelming impact on you. They don't paralyze you, anxiety and depression. So this is principle number 2. Yeah.
Yes. So in the spirit of giving a tip, one is saying that during the conversation, when you are having the conversation with the doctor, what a primary caregiver can do, or the long distance caregiver can do, is acknowledge their fear. So you say that I am feeling fearful. I am feeling anxious.
Yes.
I do not like the idea of this might happen, for example.
And the doctor or the nurse should allow exploration of this emotion. Okay, do you want to talk about it? Is a good conversation gambit. Talking about it, acknowledging it, will go a long way in reducing the edge of it. Okay, that's what I mean. It blunts the edge of this anxiety. Just merely listening. Yeah.
A picture just went in front of my eyes when I was younger and I was the caregiver, and I didn't want to acknowledge my sense of sadness or anxiety. And I wish I had this tip at that time that just say that you're feeling very sad.
To be human is to acknowledge, the human range of emotions that we go through.
Right.
When that happens, another thing happens. See, when the burden of psychological pressure goes down, the family caregiver becomes empowered. Okay, then the focus can be to tangible ways in which you can help your family, your loved one, tangibly. Then the conversation shifts to tangible ways. So that's what I think it can be done in a distance communication. See, this technique of communication has been lacking even in face-to-face communication, Bhavana. I must say, I have practiced for so long, and in medicine, I know that this is a very weak area. And we have not really cared enough to look at it and, introduce these concepts from beginning of our career, in the training and the development stage. And but it's never too late about anything. When we want to move forward, first thing is to acknowledge where you're short. So I think distance should not be such a big handicap. If we are able to address these issues, right, in the meetings, in the virtual meetings, in fact, what has happened is perhaps you can get more people on a virtual platform than face-to-face. Everybody can't be there. I had a family which during the second wave, their parents, both of them elderly, in Bangalore, very severely ill. And there was one child, one daughter in Singapore, the two children in Canada.
Oh, wow.
Can you believe? And then they were all absolutely distraught. They can't even come. There's a peak, maybe it was April. It was peak time, nobody can stir out, and they were just going to pieces. So in a platform, we could get all the children together and I could talk to them. And we could define what the parents need. Because what has happened was that even the seriousness was not known factually. They didn't know exactly why it's serious and what can be done. Eventually, they could gather their their forces together and use them locally in Bangalore and get the parents to hospital. They needed a long-term admission, maybe a few weeks, and eventually both of them did well. Sometimes things don't happen your way. Sometimes there is mortality as well. But then you are in a position prospectively to do whatever you can and then prepare for the inevitable or to come there in time. There's so many things.
Right.
This is possible. It can't get more diasporic than this.
Right, absolutely.
This is getting increasingly common experience.
That's right. We do get a lot of queries from people. For example, just yesterday I received one more, which is that, I stay in another country. My father is here in Mumbai. I need to be able to support him. How can I do it? Can there be someone who can do it? May not need nursing help. May not need hospitalization. but just needs some kind of support. And I think the overwhelming emotions in the case of a long distance caregiver is also helplessness and guilt. So
Exactly.
I would like for you to talk to us about your experience of helplessness that family caregivers experience and the guilt that comes from not being on the scene.
I think many times the guilt is self-generated,
Mm.
but very often it is stoked. The fire of guilt is stoked by well-meaning individuals within quotes, or well-wishers, or even the professional caregivers.
Right.
What happens is we must again tell ourselves and train ourselves not to be judgmental at all.
Right.
Caregiving, like, is the best opportunity to shed all your judgmental attitudes.
Right.
Because no matter what you do in life, you cannot be perfect, and you can feel guilty under any circumstance. Let us understand that and be very clear. And then many times, who is guilty? Now, the child who has gone abroad and settled there, or the parents who have also willy-nilly encouraged that settling, encourage that approach to life which makes you migrate out.
Right.
It's a collective guilt, even if it is so societal guilt. Now, with guilt, we can achieve nothing.
Mm.
We should understand that. So, whatever the circumstances we have to hand today,
Right.
how we can respond to it fully and optimally, that is what is meant by intelligent response.
Right.
That is what a caregiver must tell oneself. And then, if you are a family caregiver, with this sense of guilt, share that with your professional caregiver.
Mm.
And a well-trained and wise professional caregiver can easily put you at ease.
Right.
All it needs to say is, you see, it's not neither your fault nor anybody's fault. Even if it is so, it is our collective task to address this to the best of our ability. We can't put the clock back. We can't change a single thing that's gone by.
Right.
So guilt doesn't have any fruitful response. And
Other
that
than simply saying that I'm
frequently,
feeling guilty.
yeah. So if you simply say feeling guilty, then there should be a response which will reduce the burden. And naming and shaming is another culture which we as scientists have learned to be counterproductive.
Absolutely.
Because naming and shaming only leads to hiding and concealing.
Right.
It never leads to openness. And unless you open up an abscess, it doesn't heal. Right? In disease terms, if you open up a disease, if you open up a wound, open up an abscess, a boil, then it heals. So similarly, we are hurting, we should open up. And if somebody point a finger as at your weakness, which is making you hurt, I think that's being very, poor in understanding, and also that's not professionalism.
And in the spirit of compassionate caring, what we are saying is that while the person who has to be looked after, one needs to be compassionate towards them, one probably needs to turn the same compassion towards oneself and say, okay, these are my circumstances, these are the limitations. I would like to be at the scene, but I can't be. So what's the best that I can do?
Exactly. It's the response. It's the quality of response that counts. You see, now compassion is not towards somebody. It is a state of mind.
Mm.
Compassion is a state of understanding. It doesn't
Nice.
change with people. The compassion that you have to the family and the patient, it cannot be any different towards your own colleagues. It cannot be any different to your own needs as well. So we have known, Bhavana, that disconnecting compassion and then making it exclusive one way or the other creates a big imbalance in caregiving.
Right, right. And, we have thus far spoken about cases in which the the person who is perhaps the primary caregiver or is the main person who is the caregiver is long distance. And let's say the elderly are by themselves or the ill are by themselves. But there are also complex situations. I remember one such case where there's a home, and we know that 74% of caregivers in India are daughters-in-law. And this particular daughter-in-law was volunteered into caregiving, perhaps not by her own choice. And she was the primary caregiver. And the daughter was long distance. And there could potentially be a lot of dynamics and a lot of misunderstanding and, a lot of back and forth in such circumstances where the person staying, the primary caregiver, is doing their best perhaps. But you are concerned when you are long distance.
Yes, I know this feeling.
So help us. What can you do as a long distance caregiver in that situation?
Firstly, it all boils down to this. You're anxious and you're judgmental, and you're naming and shaming. And that all comes down to the primary caregiver out there. And if in the family hierarchy you are at a low position, that it makes it a big disadvantage. So then the dynamics come in, it's a power game played out rather than, caregiving going on. And this is where, the professional caregiver who understands the dynamics must give the right cues. Okay. And these sort of tendencies should be curbed anyway. They must be looked for and curbed. And then the noise in the background of caring should come down. That's possible. And then, what you said just now. Now, what you are doing is in the larger context clear now. By increasing the awareness, conversations like these make us think. Make us look at ourselves in the mirror, whether we are doing the same, or have we done something thoughtless? So that improves, our own sense of what's happening.
Right. I'm going to request, we have a very large gathering today. I'm going to request all those who are here today, if they have any points, any observations, and any questions, please feel free to drop them and I will pick them up and include them in our conversation. And in the meanwhile, I'm going to ask you this question. A very large set of people who reach out to us, people who are the Indian diaspora in other countries, and long distance caregiving is, so parts of it are possible. So for example, offering finance is possible, probably visiting once in a while is possible. But like you said, COVID has changed the shape and size of caregiving and its challenges. We did speak about preparing for a conversation. We did speak about regular communication. I would like for you to focus on dealing with difficult circumstances, like, let's say, a prognosis of terminal illness or mortality. What would you advise the long distance caregivers?
You see, the principles of communication become even more important when we are discussing poor prognosis or breaking bad news, or entering into the area of difficult decision making, like treatment limitation or moving over to comfort care, rather than keeping on going into the curative sort of trajectory. First thing is to have more communication, right? First thing is to bring people together on a platform more often. And then the same principles that apply in face-to-face meetings about breaking bad news is here. Here what I can say is we need to allocate more time. This is not a hurried job. when you want to break bad news, you want to listen into the emotional cues given by the family, and you want to support those emotions. Two things: you have to acknowledge the emotion, you got to support the emotion. Supporting means you're not dismissive about it. You acknowledge that it's a natural way to feel that way in the circumstances. And once you allow that expression, you move on to solutions or how you can respond. Because that thing has to go. In these situations of difficult conversation, you have 3 or 4 responses. One is denial. Okay, you say, this can't be happening to my father. No, you are mistaken, doctor. Not denial. Number 2, anger. Doctor, you were just jumping the gun. Or somebody locally within out there, the family caregiver is telling a distant caregiver that the game is up. They refuse to believe. So denial and anger precede acceptance. This is very, very frequent. I've seen in my own practice. So one must, you talked about resilience. The one way you can develop resilience is patience. It's a form of resilience only, patience. Patience is having this knowledge that there is very common to have denial and anger. We learn to absorb it for some time. Stay the course despite it. Don't get into a defensive or a argumentative situation. That doesn't help. So this also I've had to actively work on myself to stay the course and absorb it and not take it as final. We don't have to rush these decisions. That's something very important. It's not in the one meeting and you have the decision, you have everything clear. Never happens. Families which will require 3 or 4 meetings, you give them. And that investment is worth the while. Then the rapport is made. And the trust is built. Rest will come easy. Sometimes you yourself don't know. There's an uncertainty you have to live with. Again, in medicine, if we don't learn to live with uncertainties, we will create problems for ourselves and the families. We have to be able to say, I really don't know today. It's not possible to be more clear. Let us wait for a couple of days more, see what happens.
I'm reminded of my uncle, my Mamaji. He was very clear. He didn't believe in rituals and things like that. And he wanted to donate his body to the hospital, medical college. And that was his wish. Not an easy conversation that for the rest of the family. And because it was first of its kind, at the time that it happened, my aunt is an incredible woman, and she kind of made sure that it was done. And, but there was a need to first acknowledge that this is a wish that must be executed. But then what can be the forms of closure or respecting this wish, given that you're not going to follow traditional rituals?
Closure is extremely important, and closure is the ultimate respect you can give to one who is passing away.
Yes.
And we must emphasize in our conversations the importance of fulfilling wishes, and the values of the person who is passing away. The emphasis, the conversation should be around the values and wishes rather than on physiology or changes in the clinical status. After some time, we should just shift the paradigm. And we should talk more about,
So what you're suggesting is that long-distance caregivers have to pick up these difficult conversations.
They must, and they should focus on the personality of the patient. They are well aware of the person of the patient. We can discuss the person of the patient. And then I have seen, when you make this shift at the right time, the anxiety levels really come down. If you stop talking about the blood pressure and the pulse rate and this or that biochemical value, the stress becomes much less because they are irrelevant in that situation. So we should know, what is relevant on the ground to the family and to the patient. What is relevant is to elicit what's important to the patient and to ensure that you can fulfill it.
I'm thinking about myself, and when I was in such a circumstance, I wanted to feel very strong and brave, and I wanted to leave no stone unturned.
Yeah.
And that I had done my best, because there is no measure of what your best is, right? There is no, how do you know you've done your best? How do you know you have done everything that you could? And of course, our films have kind of messed around with us. But, at which point can someone who is not on the scene bring up some of these difficult conversations? And what can we do when, for example, during COVID, not many people could even be there?
You see, Bhavana, many times the family itself has its instincts, okay? They want to broach these all sorts of areas, okay? That, doctor, I don't think this is going to go anywhere, or they think, is he going to make it, or how long do you give? These sort of questions come. Take it as a cue to explore further. Rather than give platitude saying, no, he will be all right, let's hope for the best, things like that. We should know how to explore unspoken issues. Sometimes, majority of the times, it is the doctor who has to bring up the subject. Allow that to sink in. And he can see, because he's the first one to know this is not going to work. And this should be done early rather than late, not at the absolutely, when somebody's having cardiac arrest, you come out and say he's not going to do well. That everybody knows it by that time. So it is a duty of the caregiver, professional caregiver, to assess the situation, prognosticate frequently. As I said, it may not be certain, but it may be a possibility. Even at that time, the subject should be brought up. And then we can prospectively look at how the story unfolds. And then it'll become clear to both parties. At some point, this happens day after day.
Yeah, just after the second wave, my mother decided to write her will, and not just her will, her living will. And, I'm telling you, you just have to be very clear. This is what I want, and this is what I don't want. And my God, despite working in this area, it was such a hard conversation. It was not a conversation that I wanted to have. And, but she just wanted to be heard. She wanted to be assured that come what may, I will honor her wishes.
So that is the best you can do. You say you had a problem about what is the best. What is the best is not just what is the best for physiology. What is best for the whole person. What does the person want? If you cannot respect what the person wants, how can you do the best? So this is what we need to gently nudge the family towards appreciating. Okay, you are doing your best when you're caring for what the person believes, or what you're caring for what the person wants. Now, if your mother has wanted something and you are not taking that as the guide, that means there is some flawed understanding out there of what is the best to be done.
So that's, you have, by saying that, lifted a huge pressure off me personally, because one of my dad's wishes was that, he wanted to pass away at home. And one of my regrets may have been that did we do enough, and did we do whatever. But the fact that he was at home and with some family, maybe it was the best for him.
Of course it is. Now, all the ideas of what a good death is, every human being has an idea. And certainly it is not death in the ICU on a ventilator and away from the family. Certainly it is all that is wrong with death. So death is inevitable, that we agree. And if there is a curative possibility, we should fight for it. That's also correct. But there comes a time when it is not going to be fruitful. That's the time the subject should be brought up. We should be as compassionate with the living as with the dying. Okay, those people who have prospect of survival and those people who don't have prospect of survival, their needs are different.
Yeah.
And if we are really compassionate, we will tailor our actions to their needs.
Right.
Rather than force something upon us, with our preconceived notions.
That's right.
So caregiving is a constant opportunity to learn about the human being and how to answer to the needs of the human.
Yes. We have a few questions, and I do think that I think some of these conversations are best had when there is no emergency, because when there is a situation of an emergency, when there is an illness,
Exactly.
At that point, it's very hard to have a conversation about what your wishes are, etc., etc. So I think it needs to be destigmatized and it needs to be normalized that there is no reason to really have a conversation about a living will. Is the time to have the conversation about the living will. Some of the questions are, is long distance caregiving another form of telemedicine?
See, telemedicine is, you're doing mostly technical things. Okay, you're giving guidance to technical things or monitoring, from a distance. Long distance caregiving is what all we have discussed just now. It's about conversations relating to the patient from the human angle, human side, and addressing the needs and the problems that caregivers face at the human side. Because if the human side is not looked after, they are not empowered to look after the patient properly. They themselves suffer. So it becomes a flashpoint for more suffering beyond the patient.
Right. So I think one of the other things that has happened is that people are living longer than they ever did. And I do think that we come across a lot of cases in which living expenses and taking care of medical expenses or care expenses are really high. And there may be a need to figure out how to provide for those expenses. In addition to, you might not have hospitalization expenses, but you might need attendant expenses and you might need other expenses, etc. How do you account for those hidden costs that are not really spoken about, discussed in a family, and can cause a lot of stress?
Oh, you said it, the economic burden is a huge stress factor. And it is not just a stress factor, it can destroy homes.
Right.
We know that I think millions, maybe I think 3 or 4 crore of people go below the poverty line after an ICU admission with somebody in the family.
Yes.
This is a national sample survey data.
Yes.
And then 40% of families have to either borrow or they have to sell some assets in order to meet these expenses. This is so alarming.
Right.
Even after the death of a breadwinner, the family or anybody in the family can be in doldrums for a long many years and they impact children's development or education in a big way. So this sense of responsibility all of us must have here who are involved in caring for the patient. Now, I must also give you another data. Majority of the expense, in the last few days of life is on people who are not going to make it, right? The expense is inversely proportional to the longevity. Lot of it is a wastage. And this wastage I can trace back to not having a conversation. So this comes from the idea of fighting till the end and doing one's best in a misplaced manner.
Mm.
We neither do your best, nor do you ensure the best way to utilize the resources. Your own, finances, and also nation's resources.
Yeah.
That's why, in my own practice, what I have integrated is a discussion on the economics
Mm.
to assess the needs, because many times we prescribe right and left and center expensive tests or investigation with dubious benefit, particularly towards the end, trying to prove that we are doing our best. We don't have to prove anything. We have to understand a great deal. Whether we have to think, reflect, whether what we are advising or prescribing is really going to help the patient or it will do great harm. Great harm is not only in giving a toxic medicine, great harm is also in imposing great financial burdens.
Right. So if I were to kind of trace back our conversation, what you're saying is, in summary, that it is quite possible you could be living in the same city and yet be a long distance caregiver, first of all.
Yes.
The times are such that, COVID has told us that it's not necessary that you could be on the scene. And should you be long distance for whatever reason, one needs to figure out an effective communication approach, a complete comprehensive communication, which is not just about the person, the medical situation, the various stakeholders, but also the emotional, economic aspects of what does that medical condition require. There is nothing like preparing for it. So can we be a little more prepared in times when we are not in a state of emergency?
Mm.
So all of us will have somebody or the other aging around us. And it is better to start the preparation early on than later. And some conversations can be difficult conversations. End of life is inevitable, but it is a conversation worth having.
Yes, absolutely, Bhavana. Put everything in a nutshell.
Thanks to you. Thank you for helping us navigate through this very difficult topic, this very pertinent topic, however. And before I open for any questions to our audience, is there anything that you would like to say to summarize this?
I think you summarized it for me beautifully. All I can say is now the audience should come out with their questions. We should begin an open conversation right now. And that is the way forward.
Thank you. Happy to take any questions. Please raise your hand. And for this section, I am going to turn off the live conversation so that you are open to have these, a discussion of your situation. Thank you, everyone, for those of us who have joined us on live. On behalf of Caregiver Saathi, deep gratitude to not just those of you who have joined, but especially to Dr. Mani. Thank you very much for this session today. I'm just turning off the live for